this concept of interoception is, in my opinion, is going to change the way we view the creation of emotions.
I agree.
And also help inform this whole idea of alexithymia.
Emotional regulation, sensory needs, and behaviors are intricately tied together, and our guest today is going to help us sort them all out. Mona Delahooke is a pediatric psychologist and author of the book Brain Body Parenting: How to Stop Managing Behavior and Start Raising Joyful, Resilient Kids. Mona says co-regulating emotions with young people is one of the best ways we can help them. We're reaching back into our archives to share one of our most popular episodes with you again, where we dig into sensory processing, alexithymia, emotional regulation, and a lot more right here on episode 180. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity?
You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity
Podcast.
It's July, which, if you are in the schools, you're starting to look toward the new year. If you're in an administrative position, you're probably already thinking about how to implement your professional development with your staff. And if you're looking for a thorough and complete PD program to offer your staff, we currently have 2 programs that are ready for you to use on the first day back: Strategies for Supporting Twice Exceptional Students and Foundations of Dyslexia for Educators are both available for districts to use for their in-house professional development. These programs are structured like a train-the-trainer program, where someone from your staff uses our tools to help educators learn more about best practices for neurodivergent students. Some of the districts using the program are accessing title grant funds, so you may want to check and see if that's an option for your district. Of course, these are available for individual self-study too, so if you'd like to learn more, head on over to neurodiversity.university to check out the offerings. That's neurodiversity.university. Look for a link in the show notes. Our conversation with Mona Delahooke is straight ahead.
previously on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
You know, when I was a kid, oftentimes you didn't find what you were really good at until you were like 14, 15, 16, even older. But now we expect kids to find that area of excellence when they're really quite young. And the way they tell us that they're not ready for that is by looking like they're unmotivated and unwilling to try new things because they're afraid they're not going to be successful in them. And we tend to want to love the kid who we want that kid to be, as opposed to the kid who was right in front of us telling us what they already love to do.
That's episode 171. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to
the Neurodiversity Podcast.
We're excited to welcome Dr. Mona Delahooke. She's a pediatric psychologist and author of the new book, Brain Body Parenting: How to Stop Managing Behavior and Start Raising Joyful, Resilient Kids. Mona, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me, Emily. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Let's just start off and tell me a little bit about your practice and your background and how you started doing the work that you do.
Well, I started out long ago as a psychologist trained to work with older children, teenagers, and adults. And I worked in that space for about a decade before I started to feel kind of, I guess, a little burned out and a little bit worried and concerned about the amount of distress and anxiety and depression I was seeing in teenagers and older children. And I thought, wow, I think I want to work on a more preventative model. So I took 5 years. I worked part-time, and that's when I was also parenting my own 3 little children. But I took about 5 years and specialized in infant and toddler development because I wanted to learn more about how do we prevent suffering, A, and B, how does resilience develop in humans? How do we start it? And were there things I could offer families on the early end that might prevent some of the distress on the later end. And also, I love playing with kids and toddlers. So I built a practice on play and joy and neurodiversity and really looking at shifting the lens from distress and our current medical model that freaks parents out, oftentimes when their children are 2 or 3, to celebrating each child's unique individual difference, what they have to bring to the world, even if they're wired differently. That can be a source of joy and connection rather than oftentimes what happens, and that is that parents get sent down all these rabbit holes of worry and labels, and even our education system kind of starting to treat children differently. So that's a long answer to your question, which led to now, all these decades later, more advocacy work in the field, because I really think we need to shift things around for our neurodivergent population. And what you do at this podcast is give information to parents and providers. And
I think it's important also to notice that the advice and suggestions that you give are beneficial for all kids. But I do think that parents of neurodivergent kids are often the ones who probably need to hear it the most, because some of the quote unquote status quo parenting advice just really isn't clicking for them and their children. Can you talk about how that all ties in together a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think what you said is absolutely true. What's good for children is good for children. What's good for humans is good for humans. So to me, our goal as parents really is to nurture. We might use the word co-regulation that we can talk about later, but this ability to nurture and sustain our children according to their unique needs, their individual needs, their physiology in real time. In other words, they're what I call the platform, their brain and body in real time. We're always shifting. So we need to keep in mind a child's unique differences, their physiology, and then also their social and emotional development. Those 3 aspects are guiding for me as a therapist and as now as a parenting educator, are necessary for all humans, all of our kids, not just children with unique needs or neurodivergent brains. But however, I think our children with neurodivergency need this in spades. And they are the ones who get the short shrift of the deal, in my opinion, because our education system, with all due respect, is focusing on behavior management. And there we have a bit of a problem.
Why do you think that we are so ingrained in all of this behavioral stuff?
Well, the history probably goes back several hundred years, but maybe even before that, I think there is this kind of in our cultural DNA still, this idea that properly behaving, children should be seen and not heard. Those words were spoken probably hundreds and hundreds of years ago, right? I think there's kind of this mystical and kind of unspoken idea that behavior management is appropriate and somehow valued. But then if you look at the history, a very interesting history of the behavioral sciences, right? When behavior started to be studied, Pavlov studied in Russia, and then those studies came to the US at Harvard. And, you've heard of B.F. Skinner and the Skinner box and all sorts of, actually, frankly, they were interesting animal studies if you were looking at animal behaviors. And yeah, sure enough, they found that humans can work on reinforcement schedules too, to a certain extent. People were so enamored of that science. And it was brought over to the University of Washington and then to UCLA by Ivar Lovaas, who was again, they were studying humans. And at that point, autism was so poorly understood. But the idea that, they tried to help children with self-harm and different severely challenging behaviors using behavioral methods, somehow with how the research was interpreted as successful, it became the mainstay of our education system. And behavioral management, or the science of applied behavioral analysis, has turned into a billion-dollar business. It's a very big business. And this is a no blame, no shame zone. I do not believe that teachers and aides and behavioral technicians are not well-intentioned and don't want to help our kids. So let me just say that right there. However, what I do think is that because it is such a big business and it does have a lot of power and a lot of ability to lobby for their businesses, that when you look at the science, the neuroscience of resilience, and you lay that side by side to behavioral management, the two don't line up very well. And that's why I started blogging, and that's what ended up in my book, Beyond Behaviors, with many, many stories of children whose behaviors were manipulated and they suffered from additional problems like low self-esteem, even sometimes anxiety and traumatic reactions because their bodies were prevented from moving in ways that were helping them survive and thrive. And their behavioral teams were encouraging them to go against what their body needed to do in favor of being either compliant or looking neurotypical. And so enter the neurodiversity movement. We have a lot of adults who tell you, and these are my heroes. These are the people that I take my information from. Those individuals who went through their programs and are coming out and talking about it and have the courage to do that and say, this was wrong. This is not okay. I think you've interviewed Jonathan Mooney, and he says folks with neurodiversity have value not in spite of their differences, but because of their differences. And I completely agree with this. I've seen it in real life. And those individuals, those children, those teenagers and adults, they have brilliant contributions to make. And it breaks my heart when we give children the message early on, because I'm an early intervention specialist, that somehow they need to change the way they're acting.
Yeah.
That's a problem to me. That's a problem.
I think that also kind of ties in with one of the concepts that you write about, which is instead of using a top-down approach to parenting, using a bottom-up approach. And so can you talk a little bit about how that works and how that all ties in with everything you were just saying?
Yeah. Well, parenting is so complicated, isn't it? I mean, can we just say? Oh, and for all the parents listening, my heart is with you. And I have older children now, but I've been alongside parents the last couple years. And what parents raising children at home have had to go through over the last couple years is kind of defies imagination. So if you're burned out, if you're exhausted, if you feel like you're at the end of your rope, first of all, please have compassion on yourself and know you're not alone, and be super gentle on the expectations you have on yourself and on your child until things stabilize. And hopefully they're beginning to stabilize a little bit in terms of the pandemic. And if you are suffering too much, and if you feel like you're falling into a black hole that's lasting 4 weeks or months, please reach out for some support, for some help. Don't be stoic. Reach out for help. The rates of anxiety and depression in parents and caregivers, and frankly, in providers and teachers as well, are very high right now. So the studies coming through on the research bases are showing us how much we're all suffering. So please, please take good care of yourself. But to answer your question, many parents don't even know that there's a difference between top-down and body or bottom-up behaviors. So what's the difference? One of the first questions I ask is this behavior top-down or body-up? Because the way we respond to it is going to make a big difference. A top-down behavior is a behavior where the child is planning it out, is mediated or intentional, as we might say. So this is guided by a thought. What would an example be? a child's tucked in bed and they're all cozy. They know their parents are asleep, but they think, I'm hungry. I'm going to go sneak down to the kitchen and get that big slice of chocolate cake and eat it, and the parent comes down. If the parent hears some rustling in the kitchen, they're like, hey, are you hungry? Okay, that's a top-down behavior. The child had the thought. They were maybe testing the boundaries a little bit. I think it's quite creative, actually. I would have been one of those kids. But that's top-down behavior, okay? And parents can, of course, deal with that in the way they see fit. Let's contrast that to a bottom-up behavior. Let's say a child is watching TV, we're watching the Olympics, and they are beginning to fatigue, but they don't know that. And they start asking the parent for that chocolate cake. And the parent says, no, sweetie, we've already had dinner and I can get you some sliced apple or something. And then all of a sudden, like kind of on a dime, the child throws the remote for the TV, is red-faced, crying, screaming, sweaty. The features on that behavior, how fast it happened, how automatic it seemed, the red flushed face, the irregular heartbeat, all of those are signs of a body up behavior. When the child's nervous system shifted onto a pathway away from the social, what we call the social engagement pathway, or the green, I just call it like the green pathway, the green light to interact, turned into this red explosion. And that is actually a sign, like a stop sign, like just stop as a parent, stop and observe what's going on. Okay, this is body up. They got up early this morning. It's an hour past bedtime. Okay, things are pretty thin with the child. They weren't able to manage the emotion around not getting a piece of cake. That would be an example of a child who doesn't need discipline. Of course, you keep them safe and make sure that they know that it's not okay to throw a remote, but you just don't go on a big, long discourse of reading them a bunch of rules. You just realize, we need to help this body right now. I think it's time to prepare to go to bed as quickly as possible. You say to yourself, and then you know that the body is in charge. Their nervous system is at a place where it's not able to self-regulate very well. So this whole distinction of figuring out, is this bottom up? Is this top down? Can really help guide us as parents as to what we do in difficult parenting moments.
What are our next steps?
Yeah, and our first step should be checking in with ourselves and seeing if we are. Like sometimes,
yes.
When your child does something like that, it automatically triggers us into that body up reaction. And again, completely expected. We all lose it as parents every now and then, right? But we do want to, through our power of self-observation, make sure that if we are in that body up, out of control phase, that we pause if we can, take a moment, don't react from that space, because that's when our kind of unfortunate parenting moments can happen. And we may do or say things that we really don't intend.
Yeah. In our house, we have a lot of neurodivergence. It becomes a little chaotic at times between the five of us. And I know for me, you mentioned like that situation, like kind of happening in the evenings. And for me, that is definitely when I'm at my least flexible and my least resilient on my own. And so I kind of have to be I try to be really aware of that and very cautious, which is helpful, but it doesn't help me from feeling guilty afterwards if I don't have it, if I'm not able to do it. It's hard.
It's, since our kids are our biggest responsibility and so much is at stake, right? It's easy to be hard on ourselves, but I think it's also so important to realize that how much of an empty cup are we trying to pour from? And you can't, as that old saying goes, you really can't pour from an empty cup. So that brings it right back to what you said. It's just this awareness. If you realize you're getting thin at the end of the day, it's like, okay, I'm going to take it a little slower here. I'm going to be a little more gentle on myself. And sure enough, it can, and it does flow down to our children in a parallel process.
One of the things that I've been actually reflecting on quite a bit recently and kind of trying to just seeing it in different situations and trying to figure out like what the best way is to support some of my clients or different people, is the connection between sensory awareness and emotions and behaviors. And I find it really fascinating. And I know that many neurodivergent people just have significant sensory processing differences, whatever that might be. And that might impact, for example, their interoceptive sensory awareness. So for our listeners who might not be familiar with that term, that means interoception is the awareness of the sensations that occur within our body, like differentiating between a feeling that might mean that I'm hungry, that I need to go to the bathroom, or maybe I'm feeling anxious, or a variety of other things that similar sensation might indicate. And so that ties in to this concept of alexithymia, which refers to someone who has a difficult time identifying emotions and the variations within those emotions. So I'm curious about how you conceptualize that and how you might support people, kids, whoever, who might be experiencing the intersection of those influences.
You've just brought up such a hot topic in neuroscience and in, I think, maybe beginning in the clinical world as well. And it's this whole idea of the role of what you said, interoception, in our physiological functioning, in our emotional functioning, in our ability to be aware of an internal sensation, which is called interoceptive awareness. So interoception is a subconscious process. So it happens all the time. That feedback is going from in and around our internal organs and the deep insides of our bodies up to the brain. And wow, the research around this is so complex and it is way beyond my level of expertise as a clinician, but I am a voracious reader about interoception. And I'm in a really amazing study group with some of the leaders who are clinicians as we translate the neuroscience and what it means for our children, for our parenting, for ourselves. This concept of interoception is, in my opinion, is going to change the way we view the creation of emotions.
I agree.
And also help inform this whole idea of alexithymia, literally, which means without words for feelings, which many individuals experience. Like, it's not easy to say, oh, I feel exuberant, or I feel terrified, or I feel like I have butterflies in my stomach. Those statements are incredibly, incredibly complex. They come out of a whole cascade of processes. It's just an area that is super emerging, but extremely important. If your listeners aren't aware of the work of Kelly Mahler, she has written a book about interoception, and she has a Facebook group around interoception. I can't remember the exact name of the group, but it's Kelly Mahler, Mahler, and she is an occupational therapist who is translating for parents and caregivers of neurodivergent kids. She works in early intervention and works with children with brain wiring differences in their families, helping develop interoceptive awareness. So why is this important? It's believed that our basic feelings inside of our body arise from sensations. And the lab of Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett is looking strongly at how emotions are constructed. And so the framework around that has to do with sensations at kind of ground zero, which then informs the body as to what's called affects, basic affects. But we can think of basic affect as feeling good or bad, yucky, like on a valence of I feel really crummy to I feel good. It's kind of a very vague notion of I'm okay or feeling okay or I'm not feeling okay. So that range of pleasant to unpleasant, like if you ask a person, is this sensation in your body right now, is it pleasant or unpleasant? Some individuals can't locate that, right? So we can start there, just trying to locate, is this generally pleasant or unpleasant? And is the level in terms of calmness versus agitation? Are you feeling generally more calm or are you activated? Is this urge to move? Are you really not feeling good? We can look at these basic what they're called valences, but pleasant or unpleasant, calm to agitated. We can start there with our kids and with ourselves, and then grow awareness of thinking about, rather than asking someone how you're feeling, because that's a very sophisticated question, we might shift it to, are you feeling anything in your body? Where are you feeling something? And it could be anything. So where, instead of asking, how are you feeling? You say, where? Is it tummy? Is it toe? Is it head? Is it heart? Let's see possibly if an individual can locate where they're feeling something. That's super powerful. That's the beginning of interoceptive awareness, is becoming aware of physiological, meaning body sensations. And some believe it's the birthplace of emotional literacy, because basic sensations later on may be experienced as emotions. If that sounds technical, I'm sorry. The research is so interesting, but I think it just tells us as parents that we can really start to pay attention to our own internal sensations and then help our children to do the same. That's a very powerful precursor of helping them later on to be better aware of their emotions, if they can.
There are two different interventions and techniques that I've seen that I've used with clients that families might find really useful. So one of them was somebody described, instead of asking a child how they're feeling or to label an emotion, having them draw like what they're feeling. So it might be like a spiral or like a scribble or a zigzag or something, and kind of identifying that within the body, which I thought was really kind of a different way to describe that.
Love that. Love that.
Yeah,
and then you don't have to use words at all. It's symbolic through your squiggles or your colors or whatever you use.
Yeah, whatever it might be. Yeah. And the other one is an app called, have you ever seen the Mood Meter app?
No, I haven't seen that one yet.
There's an app and you can get a poster for it, and it might be, I don't want to misstate where it's from, but anyway, but people can look it up. But basically what it does, what I love about the app is it's just a rectangle, but it kind of does kind of that pleasant to unpleasant or comfortable to uncomfortable, how it's feeling, and then how somebody is activated. And it's like a grid with all these squares, and it's kind of nice with the colors because they kind of blend like a spectrum, but you can kind of click around. And so you might click on this and it says, oh, well, I feel content. But if you go like one step up on activation or one step lower on pleasantness or whatever, it kind of guides kids to help find some of those words if they can kind of tie those things together.
Right. It sounds like it's kind of maybe scaffolding. We can do that as parents with ourselves, but sounds like the app is kind of using technology to help scaffold children onto greater and greater levels of awareness.
Yeah, so they can try to find that language and kind of tying the two things together.
I think that language isn't the magic. Finding a word for something isn't the magic. The magic is being able to find a way to connect with yourself and realize when you need help from other people. And of course, in our culture, language is one way to do that, or one of the main ways we have to do that. But I think it's so important to also think about the accommodations that we need to make for our non-speakers, right? And like even someone who doesn't have the motor control to be able to draw, but maybe uses their AAC device or FC, whatever it is, to try to help us know how we can help them, and if they're in physical pain or if the sensation is pleasant or unpleasant, if it's on the continuum of calm to agitated. So yeah, it's such a fascinating area. Fascinating area. And if you think about, like, if our body is excited and feeling positive, that is the combination that we have for play. And a body that's active, that's feeling good, and that's a perfect condition for play. But if a body is excited and feeling really bad, then that's the condition for suffering. So there's just a lot to learn. There's so much to learn about this whole idea of interoceptive awareness.
One other topic I wanted to ask you about, and that is about your thoughts on neurodivergent kids who grow up, whether they are either diagnosed or not, or misdiagnosed, and how that might impact them as they grow up. I mean, I think I'll let you kind of go where you feel like is meaningful for you with that topic.
Wow. It's such a big topic, and it's such a powerfully important question, Emily. So I want to tread lightly because I have such compassion for parents as they navigate this landscape, right? They navigate this landscape, and I don't want parents to fear the systems that are in place for our children. You know, if we do, then you might feel kind of stuck. And what I want to say is that as a parent, the world is opening up to the idea that differences don't equal deficits. And so that's a very cool place to be, because I truly feel that children understand when their differences are being treated as deficits. They feel it. They understand that they're not measuring up. And this is, I think, one of the biggest goals for us going forward in early intervention, in education, in mental health, is to start turning around the narrative of how our neurodivergent children, the messages our neurodivergent children are being given. So as a parent, I would say, pay attention to those messages your children are given and make sure that they are placed in a positive framework, that differences are not to be worried about or managed away, but really used to better understand the child and to develop a deeper relationship with the child. Joyful play, which is every child and parent's birthright, is to connect and enjoy and play with each other. And so that's on the one hand, you have more control than you think. But depending on where you live across the country, you may not have a lot of treatment modalities available to you. So if you're in a school district, or if you're in a place where the treatment team is wanting you to do things that will extinguish a behavior or stop a behavior, for example, in a toddler, and you feel like, you know what, this behavior is kind of part of who my kid is. Like they want to read the certain book over and over again, and I'm being told to hide the book or throw it away. Understand you have control. You don't have to do that kind of stuff. You can value your child's differences and be curious about them rather than freaking out about them. And I have a lot of, blog posts on my website that if you go there to help you navigate, find the words to find your voice and allow you and your child and your family's values and your culture to determine what information the world is going to be giving your children. And I believe that we need to turn it around. I believe that many of our neurodivergent children are being given messages that are not affirming of their humanity. And I don't think that we should have things like ignoring behaviors or seclusion or restraint. So I think we need to really be kind of proactive, and it's a hopeful time because the neurodiversity movement is helping us. Podcasts like this, parents are getting more information, way more information than they had, say, a couple decades ago when I started out in my practice.
Mona Delahooke, author of Brain Body Parenting, How to Stop Managing Behavior and Start Raising Joyful, Resilient Kids. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Emily. Take care.
Our growing awareness of how the brains and bodies of neurodivergent people vary is our biggest asset to helping create a neurodiversity-affirming world. We can learn about the differences in communication, emotions, or executive functioning just by listening to the experiences of the people we're trying to help. Every neurodivergent child is different, and there's no one single solution that will work for everyone. Why would there be? But taking the time to re-examine the status quo and find new ways to support those around us can only lead to more progress. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
We'd like to thank Dr. Mona Delahooke. You'll find links to her books, her website, and more in the show notes and on the episode page at neurodiversitypodcast.com. Also, thanks to you and everyone who supports us in so many ways. The best way you can do that is to share us with a friend. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. Office manager and social media director is Krista Brown. The executive producer and post-production editor is me, Dave Morris. For everyone here, thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance.